Arab executive humiliates his African bride in front of the guests, but he didn't know who was standing behind him. The grand hall was bathed in an air of elegance and anticipation. White roses adorned every table, their delicate petals gently swaying in the light breeze. A string quartet played softly in the background, and the crystal chandeliers overhead sparkled with the light of 1,000 tiny diamonds. Everything had been planned to perfection for this moment, the wedding of Maya Davis. Maya stood at the altar, radiant in her ivory gown. Her heart swelled with joy, not because she was nervous, but because this day symbolized everything she had worked for. From the hardships of growing up in a rough neighborhood to losing her mother, she had fought hard for this moment. Now, standing before Aaron Whitmore, her groom, she couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. He was tall, blue-eyed, and successful, everything she had been told she didn't deserve. But he had chosen her. Or so she thought. Aaron, however, stood next to her with a grin too wide, too stiff. His best man, standing at his side, chuckled under his breath, nudging Aaron's shoulder as though they shared a private joke. Maya didn't notice, but the man standing behind Aaron, General Elijah Davis, Maya's grandfather, did. General Elijah Davis had seen it all. His eyes narrowed, sensing that something wasn't right. His military jacket, adorned with badges of honor, stiffened with tension. There was a storm brewing, and he could feel it. The priest, smiling warmly, began the ceremony. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union." But before he could continue, Aaron raised his hand, cutting him off. "Hold up," Aaron said, his voice echoing through the room. "Before we go any further, I'd like to say a few words." Maya turned toward him, a bright smile on her face. She was ready for the kind words she had waited so long to hear. But what Aaron said next would rip apart everything she thought she knew. The guests leaned forward, eager for the moment, unaware of the dark turn things were about to take. Aaron cleared his throat. "I just want to take a moment to thank Maya. I mean, she really shot for the stars. She went from working at a diner to wearing a designer wedding gown in a hall like this." A collective gasp ran through the guests as they processed his words. From waiting tables at a greasy diner to wearing a designer gown, Aaron continued, his voice growing louder. "It's inspiring, right?" Maya's heart dropped. She blinked, struggling to process what was happening. A nervous chuckle escaped her, but it was lost in the growing tension in the room. She could hear the uncomfortable laughter of the guests, unsure of how to react. They could sense something wasn't right, but none dared to speak up. Aaron smirked, looking over at his best man as if sharing an inside joke. "She's come a long way, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. From Section 8 housing to a Section A guest list. The room fell silent, and Maya's cheeks burned with humiliation. This wasn't the man she had imagined standing at the altar with her. This wasn't the future she had dreamed of. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "What are you doing?" Aaron merely shrugged, "Just telling the truth, babe. Isn't that what marriage is built on?" He turned to face the crowd, his words now a punchline for all to hear. Elijah's jaw clenched. He could feel the growing tension in the air, and his gaze was locked on Aaron, his eyes narrowing with barely contained fury. It was clear. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. This was about respect, dignity, and something far more dangerous. Aaron's smirk remained fixed on his face as he turned back to Maya, his eyes gleaming with superiority. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a more intimate, yet unsettling tone. "I had my doubts, you know? Not about marrying you. I knew this would be fun. But about whether you really loved me, or if you were just after what I could offer." Maya froze, her breath catching in her throat. Was he really saying this? In front of everyone? Her hands trembled at her sides, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. Aaron leaned in closer, his lips almost touching her ear, his voice low enough only for her to hear. "So, I decided to test you." A gasp rippled through the guests. The tension in the room thickened like a storm cloud, darkening every corner. The silence that followed felt suffocating, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Maya's mind raced. What test? She opened her mouth to speak, but Aaron cut her off, grinning widely as if he had just won some sick game. He raised his hand to silence the murmurs, then held up his phone for all to see. "I told her I was broke last month," Aaron said loudly, "lost everything in a lawsuit." Watched her face turn pale. Watched her hesitate. Maya's heart sank. The room seemed to close in on her, and she could feel her legs shaking beneath her. The humiliation was almost too much to bear. "He's lying," she wanted to scream. "He's lying, and the world is believing him." "I told her I needed space," Aaron continued, now smirking with an almost gleeful satisfaction. I wanted to see if she'd stay. Wanted to see if she loved me for me, or for what I could give her. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes. The sting of his betrayal was unbearable. Why would he do this? She wondered, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. The guests were silent now, some whispering among themselves, others too stunned to speak. The tension in the hall was palpable. Maya blinked back tears, trying to regain control. You said you needed space, she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet carrying a weight of hurt no one could ignore. Aaron's gaze never wavered, his eyes cold as he nodded. Exactly, I wanted to see if you would stay. And, surprise, you did. I watched you hesitate, but you stayed. And that's when I knew. He paused, looking out over the room as if he were addressing the entire world, not just Maya. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of what I could give you. The money, the lifestyle. Maya's voice cracked as she spoke, barely above a whisper. I didn't care about the money. Aaron raised his brows, feigning disbelief. Sure you didn't, he mocked. After all, you texted your friend about how you might need a plan B fiancé just in case I turned out to be broke. The room gasped in shock as Aaron held up his phone, displaying the incriminating texts for everyone to see. Maya's face flushed a deep crimson as she heard the whispers and saw the judgment in the eyes of the guests. Maya's mind raced. He saw the messages? How could he? Her trust had been shattered, her dignity humiliated in front of an audience she never expected. Elijah, however, was no longer standing still. The quiet fury in his eyes had shifted into something much more dangerous. As Aaron finished his cruel tirade, the general stepped forward, his gaze never leaving the man who dared to belittle his granddaughter. His voice was low, yet it held the weight of a man who had seen wars, fought for honor, and lost comrades in battle. Enough. The word sliced through the tension like a blade, and for the first time, Aaron's smug smile faltered. Maya looked up, her heart pounding. Elijah was standing behind Aaron now, his eyes fixed on the young man with the authority of a lifetime's experience. Every inch of the general's presence commanded attention, respect, and fear. Aaron turned, his smile faltering as he took in the man standing behind him. It wasn't just any guest. The man who now loomed over him was none other than Major General Elijah Davis, Maya's grandfather. The decorated military hero, feared and respected by all, and a living legend who had earned the right to be respected, not only by soldiers but by anyone who crossed his path. Aaron took a hesitant step back, his earlier confidence draining away as Elijah's intense gaze bore down on him. Maya's tears began to fall, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of release, of finally seeing the truth for what it was. Elijah wasn't just a protector. He was a force of nature, and Aaron was about to learn just how deep that force ran. General Elijah Davis didn't flinch as Aaron took a step back. The room was deathly quiet, all eyes now on Elijah, who had shifted from the back of the hall to center stage in a matter of moments. His uniform, impeccable and adorned with medals, seemed to shimmer under the light, a stark contrast to Aaron's disheveled appearance. Do you know who you've just disrespected? Elijah's voice rang out, each word heavy with authority. Aaron's face paled, his mouth opening to form a response, but no words came out. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by uncertainty. Elijah stepped forward, his boots clicking on the polished floor, each step louder than the last. The guests watched in awe, a few even inching forward, drawn to the power emanating from the general. I taught my granddaughter how to walk with dignity, Elijah continued, his voice cold but unwavering. I taught her to hold her head high even when the world tried to knock her down. She survived things your kind wouldn't last a day under, and still, she stood tall. She became who she is today not because of your money, but because of the strength within her. Aaron opened his mouth again, but Elijah raised his hand, silencing him. I didn't raise my granddaughter to be a pawn in someone else's game, Aaron. His words were laced with venom, his eyes locked onto Aaron's, daring him to speak. The air in the hall seemed to thicken, the weight of Elijah's words crushing Aaron, and yet, there was no escape. The guests were silent, their gazes flicking between the two men, unsure if they should intervene or let this play out. Elijah took another step forward, his figure towering over Aaron now. I stood by, praying she would find someone worthy of her, someone with enough man in him to match her strength, to be her equal, to honor her. But you've shown your true colors, haven't you? Aaron shifted uncomfortably under the weight of Elijah's words, his arrogant mask cracking further. You've humiliated her, Elijah said, his voice growing more menacing. You mocked her on her wedding day, in front of her family, her friends, and her late mother's photo. You thought you could use her for your amusement. But you're wrong, Aaron. You've underestimated the strength of the woman you tried to break. You've underestimated me. The silence in the room was deafening. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others simply nodding in quiet approval of the general's words. Maya's hands trembled at her sides, but there was a subtle shift in her posture. She was no longer the fragile woman being humiliated in front of an audience. She was regaining her composure, her dignity, her power. Elijah's gaze never left Aaron. You thought you could break her. But you've only proven how small you are. You don't deserve her. You never did. The tension between the two men was palpable, as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Aaron, visibly shaken, opened his mouth, but Elijah didn't give him the chance to speak. No, Elijah said, his voice low and firm. You've said enough. He turned to the crowd, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces. This ceremony is over. Maya blinked back the last of her tears, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, of finally letting go of the man who had failed to see her worth. Without looking back at Aaron, Maya took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and began to walk down the aisle. There were no cheers, no applause, just the sound of her heels echoing in the hall, a solitary figure walking away from the humiliation she had endured. As Maya moved, she felt a surge of strength rising within her. She had walked through fire, and now, she was free. The hall remained frozen in place as Maya walked away from the altar, her head held high. The guests, who had once gathered for a joyful occasion, now watched in stunned silence as she made her exit. There were no cheers, no applause, only a quiet murmur, a ripple of disbelief spreading through the crowd. Aaron stood at the altar, his once proud posture now a shadow of what it had been. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his eyes flickered nervously from one guest to another. He had planned this day to perfection, to humiliate Maya and prove to everyone, including himself, that he was in control. But now, as the room watched him with a mix of disdain and pity, it was clear that he was the one who had lost. The general's gaze was still fixed on Aaron, unwavering and unyielding. Elijah had not moved, standing like an immovable force, his presence dominating the entire space. Aaron couldn't escape the weight of Elijah's stare. It felt as if his very soul were being weighed and found wanting. Leave, Aaron. Elijah's voice was calm but laced with a cold finality. Your presence is no longer welcome here. Aaron opened his mouth, but no words came out. His tongue felt thick, his throat dry. The general's words had shattered him, left him exposed and vulnerable in a way he had never imagined. Around him, the guests were slowly beginning to stand. Some were already heading for the exits, whispering amongst themselves, their opinions of Aaron now clear. A few faces showed signs of sympathy for the man who had humiliated his bride, but the majority seemed only to offer quiet approval of Maya's courage. Aaron's best man, still standing by his side, gave him a helpless look. The smug confidence that had marked Aaron's earlier behavior was now replaced by a sense of isolation and defeat. He was no longer the man at the center of this grand spectacle. He was an outcast, standing alone in the face of his own cruelty. Maya, meanwhile, was outside the hall, walking briskly down the grand steps of the venue. The cold night air wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, and for the first time in hours, she felt a sense of peace. Her steps were steady, each one bringing her further away from the man who had humiliated her, and closer to a future she could now shape for herself. Her aunt, a gentle woman with kind eyes, was waiting for her just outside. She stepped forward and placed a soft shawl over Maya's shoulders, the warmth a small comfort against the chill of the night. You walked away with class, my dear, her aunt whispered, pressing a handkerchief into Maya's hands. Maya smiled faintly, her eyes still red from the tears she had fought to hold back. She was no longer the woman Aaron had tried to break. She was someone stronger, someone capable of standing tall on her own. She had survived far worse than this, and now she was free. I'm proud of you, her aunt continued, squeezing Maya's hand. He didn't deserve you. Maya turned to look one last time at the ornate building, the wedding venue that should have been her happiest day. But instead of the expected sadness, she felt only a quiet sense of release. He freed me, Maya whispered to herself, the weight of the words settling in her heart. Inside the hall, the atmosphere had shifted from tense silence to quiet murmurs, as guests filed out one by one. It was no longer a wedding reception. It was a spectacle, a public shaming that would be remembered for years to come. Aaron stood alone, his best man awkwardly shifting beside him. The laughter and whispers in the crowd were no longer directed at Maya, they were now aimed at him, and every word cut deeper than any knife. The reality of what he had done began to settle in, but it was too late. The damage was irreversible. As the last of the guests left, Aaron's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it briefly, his heart sinking when he saw the name on the screen. It was a message from his company's PR team, their words blunt and to the point. "We need to talk now." He clicked it off without replying, staring at the empty hall. The chandeliers that had sparkled so brightly earlier now seemed cold, indifferent. Aaron ran a hand through his hair, his mind spiraling into chaos. What had I done? The humiliation he'd caused Maya, his fiancée, his bride, the woman he claimed to love, was unforgivable. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, but there was no escaping it. Elijah Davis had made sure of that. As much as Aaron wanted to retreat into the sanctuary of his wealth, his status, and his connections, he knew deep down that none of it could save him now. The public's perception of him had shifted in an instant. Back in the privacy of their hotel room, Maya was in the embrace of her family. Elijah was with her, but now, the bond between them was stronger than ever. Maya had always admired her grandfather's quiet strength, but today, she saw the full extent of his power. His presence had been enough to shut down Aaron's cruel speech, to silence his arrogance in front of everyone. Maya's younger brother, Nate, squeezed her hand tightly. "You're a warrior, Maya. No one should treat you like that. You don't deserve to be anyone's joke." Maya smiled through her tears, looking up at him. He was right, and in that moment, she felt a sense of liberation she hadn't known she could experience. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was free. Her phone buzzed with messages, but she ignored them. This was her moment. She had worked hard to get here, and nothing could take that from her. Just then, her aunt, who had been standing quietly in the corner, approached her with a small, polished box. "This is for you," she said softly, handing it to Maya. Maya looked down at the box, confused. She hadn't expected any gifts tonight. She opened it slowly, revealing a note, folded neatly inside. She unfolded the paper, the handwriting instantly familiar. It was her mother's handwriting. "My Maya," the note began. "If you are reading this, it means today was your wedding day, and I am not there. But if that man made you feel anything less than the queen you are, walk away. A wedding is a day, but your worth is forever." Maya's breath hitched. She could almost hear her mother's voice in her mind, her words filled with love, guidance, and strength. Tears filled her eyes, not from the pain of the past, but from the love she had always carried with her. "Walk away, my dear. He doesn't deserve you. You are enough." Elijah, standing beside Maya, placed a hand on her shoulder, his strong grip offering reassurance. "Your mother was right. This is your moment. You've turned your pain into strength, and now, you walk forward with your head high." Maya nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. She could feel the presence of her mother, her spirit wrapped around her, lifting her up. The world outside Maya's quiet haven felt like a storm. The public fallout from Aaron's cruel behavior spread like wildfire. By morning, his reputation had taken a devastating hit. The social media storm that followed his humiliation of Maya was relentless. Posts, tweets, and screenshots filled every platform, casting Aaron as the villain of a twisted story. His callous treatment of Maya was all anyone could talk about. Within hours, photos of the ceremony, or what had been supposed to be a ceremony, were flooding the internet. The images of Maya walking away, her face a mixture of pain and strength, were shared and reshared. The caption under one photo read, "A queen walks away from the jester." The internet had chosen its side, and Aaron had lost. But the fallout didn't stop there. Maya's phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and women she had never met. All offering support, all expressing admiration for her bravery. A few had even shared their own stories, stories of heartbreak, betrayal, and rising above. Maya's story had resonated with them. Her inbox was filled with messages from women who had been in toxic relationships, who had suffered humiliations far worse than hers. They saw her as a symbol of strength, as a woman who had fought back against the lies, against the shame, and had come out victorious. Maya felt both humbled and overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. And then, there was the message from her late mother. The note she had read in the hotel room, now folded and tucked into her pocket, had left a deep imprint on her heart. "Your worth is forever," those words echoed in her mind. The quiet reminder that she was not defined by the moment, nor by the man who had tried to break her. As Maya moved through the days after the wedding, she found herself re-evaluating everything. What had been a dream wedding had turned into an awakening. She had been given a second chance, a new beginning, and she wasn't going to squander it. While Maya's life was moving forward, Aaron found himself trapped in the wreckage of his own making. The social media storm was just the beginning. By the time he stepped back into the now deserted wedding hall, reality hit him full force. The hall that had been filled with guests, laughter, and promises of a future now stood empty, the echoes of his actions still hanging in the air. The once impressive decorations seemed hollow, the grandeur of the place mocking him. Aaron took a slow, uncertain step forward, his gaze lingering on the altar where Maya had stood moments before. He had expected this to be the day he had it all. His bride, his image, his wealth, but in one brutal, careless moment, he had thrown it all away. His phone buzzed again, and this time, it was from his company's PR team. He glanced at it briefly, his stomach sinking further with each passing second. "We need to talk. Your actions last night are unacceptable. We have already lost multiple sponsorships, and the board is reconsidering your position." He closed the message without responding. He couldn't face it. The idea of losing everything he had worked for was too much to bear. Just then, his best man, who had quietly observed the aftermath, walked over to him, his face filled with silent judgment. "Aaron," he said, his voice flat. "You messed up. Big time." Aaron's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, ready to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. The truth was undeniable. He had messed up. He had humiliated Maya in front of everyone, and now, the world knew it. "I don't know how you come back from this," his best man added, shaking his head. "I honestly don't." Aaron's throat tightened. The full weight of the consequences was now sinking in. His reputation was shattered, his business relationships were crumbling. And worse still, he had lost the woman he was supposed to love, the woman who had trusted him. He had always prided himself on control, on being the one who called the shots. But now, the truth was clear. Aaron had lost control, and it had cost him everything. The days following the wedding were a blur for Aaron. Each time he checked his phone, it seemed like more bad news piled on. The company was distancing itself from him, sponsors were pulling out, and his social media was flooded with messages of disgust. The humiliation he had caused Maya was now turning into his own personal downfall. The public had turned on him in an instant, and the media frenzy had only intensified. Tabloids had picked up the story, labeling him the heartless groom who tried to destroy his bride's spirit. His face had become synonymous with cruelty, his name a punchline for anyone who wanted to feel morally superior. But the worst blow had come from his own family. His mother, once the fiercest supporter of his every move, had called him in the middle of the night. Her voice had been strained, disappointed, and cold. "You've ruined yourself, Aaron," she had said. "Not just your reputation, but your soul. How could you do this to her? To Maya? You've embarrassed us all." Her words still echoed in his ears. No matter how many calls he made, no matter how many apologies he wrote, it felt like no one wanted to hear him anymore. His pride, once his greatest asset, was now his deepest regret. Back at the hotel where Maya had sought refuge, the night had passed in quiet solace. The sound of a busy diner, the soft clinking of cups and the murmur of hushed voices around her, felt like a world away from the chaos Aaron had left behind. Maya sat at a small booth, her wedding dress still on, the fabric now crumpled from a long evening of solitude and reflection. Elijah had stayed with her for a while, but now, Maya was alone. She sipped her coffee slowly, her mind replaying the events of the day. At first, she had been consumed by anger, hurt, and betrayal. But now, the sting of those emotions had faded, replaced with something far more powerful: clarity. She was free. Maya's phone buzzed again, this time a message from her best friend, Rachel. "You good? Heard what happened, and I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. You deserve so much more than that jerk. I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. I love you." Maya smiled faintly. Rachel had been there for her through thick and thin, and now, more than ever, she was reminded that the people who truly cared about her had always been there, and it wasn't Aaron. It never had been. The words from her mother's note still echoed in her heart, comforting her like a whisper of strength. "A wedding is a day, but your worth is forever." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to just breathe. The weight of the past few hours had been overwhelming, but in this quiet space, she found peace. The world was moving forward without her, and she was finally free to decide where she wanted to go from here. Back in the city, Aaron's world continued to spiral. His company had released an official statement disavowing his actions, distancing themselves from him entirely. Friends who had once considered him a peer now avoided him, and even his closest allies were questioning his integrity. In the quiet of his office, Aaron stared at his phone, reading over the countless messages and emails that flooded in, but none of them offered comfort. Instead, they were reminders of his mistakes. His reputation was shattered, and there was no easy way to fix it. But it wasn't just about the company or his wealth anymore. As the days passed, Aaron came to the painful realization that he had lost Maya, the one person who had ever made him feel like he mattered. And now, he would never get her back. He had underestimated her strength. He had thought that his wealth and status would be enough to hold her, but in the end, it was his cruelty that pushed her away. Aaron dropped his head into his hands, the full weight of what he had done crashing down on him. He had humiliated Maya in front of everyone, including her family, her late mother's memory, and her friends. And in doing so, he had lost everything that had once been important to him. But Maya's strength wasn't the only thing he had underestimated. Elijah's fury had been just as powerful. The general hadn't just humiliated Aaron in front of the guests, he had stripped him of his dignity, his pride, and his place in the world. Aaron knew, deep down, that his path forward would be long and painful. But no amount of money or power could ever undo the damage he had caused. He had burned every bridge, and the cold reality was that he was now alone. Days turned into weeks, and the fallout from the wedding continued to shape Aaron's new reality. The media storm had settled, but the damage to his reputation lingered like an open wound that refused to heal. Every time he stepped out of his apartment, he felt the weight of judgment on him. From the stares of strangers, the whispers that followed him, the knowing looks from people who once admired him. He was a pariah, a man who had lost everything, not because of a scandal or a bad business decision, but because of his own arrogance and cruelty. But as painful as it was, Aaron knew that the first step toward any kind of redemption was facing the truth, something he had avoided for so long. He spent his days at the office, where no one dared speak to him directly. His assistant, once loyal and attentive, now avoided his gaze, and the staff worked with tense professionalism, never daring to engage in small talk. No one wanted to get too close, fearing they would be tainted by association. Aaron's calls were rarely answered, and his attempts to fix the mess he had created were met with resistance from every corner of his life. No one would return his calls, and every email he sent to his PR team seemed to go unanswered. The company's board had already begun the process of replacing him, and his once promising career now seemed like a distant memory. But the silence of the world outside his office was nothing compared to the silence that consumed him at night. In the quiet of his apartment, he couldn't escape the constant replay of Maya's face, the pain, the hurt, the betrayal, and Elijah's unforgiving eyes staring him down in front of the crowd. Meanwhile, Maya's life was moving in an entirely different direction. The pain of the wedding day had faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of clarity and purpose. No longer the woman bound to a toxic relationship, Maya had reclaimed her life. She had poured herself into the foundation her mother's letter had inspired her to create, the Unveiled Foundation. It was a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women who had walked away from toxic marriages, from betrayal and humiliation. Maya used her story as a beacon for other women, offering them resources, legal aid, and emotional support as they rebuilt their lives, just as she was doing. The first press conference for the foundation was a resounding success. Elijah stood by her side, as always, the proud protector of his granddaughter's newfound strength. His unwavering support had never faltered, and with every passing day, Maya grew stronger. She had turned her pain into power, and she was no longer defined by Aaron or anyone else's opinion of her. She was defining her own future now. As she spoke to the gathered press, her voice confident and clear, Maya's words struck a chord with everyone who was listening. She was no longer the shy, uncertain woman Aaron had tried to break. She was a leader, a woman who had faced adversity and emerged victorious. This foundation is not just about helping women escape toxic relationships, Maya had said during the press conference. It's about giving them the tools to thrive, to rebuild, to understand their worth, because no woman should ever be made to feel like she isn't enough. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. Maya was praised for her courage, her resilience, and her commitment to helping other women reclaim their lives. She became a symbol of hope, and her foundation quickly gained traction, attracting donors, volunteers, and women from all over the country. Her phone buzzed with messages of support from every corner. Former colleagues, family members, and even strangers who had been touched by her story reached out to her. But it was one message, in particular, that stood out, a message from Rachel, her best friend, with just 3 simple words: "You inspire me." Maya smiled at the screen, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had come so far, and she knew now that she was not alone in her journey. As for Aaron, his reality had become a slow, painful burn. He had tried, desperately, to reach out to Maya, to apologize, to somehow make amends for the irreparable damage he had caused. But every time he picked up the phone, he hesitated, knowing that it would only add to his shame. Maya had moved on. She was no longer the woman he could manipulate. She had taken her power back, and Aaron had no choice but to accept the consequences of his actions. One evening, sitting alone in his penthouse, Aaron caught sight of a news report about Maya's foundation. The headline flashed across the screen: Maya Davis launches nonprofit to help women rebuild their lives after toxic marriages. The report praised Maya for her strength, her grace, and the work she was doing for women all over the country. Aaron's heart sank. He couldn't believe the woman he had humiliated was now a beacon of hope for so many. The weight of his betrayal pressed heavily on his chest. He had broken her, and in doing so, he had unknowingly helped create a woman who would change the world. For the first time, Aaron understood the true cost of his actions. It wasn't just the loss of a woman who had trusted him. It was the loss of everything he had once valued. Money, power, success, none of it mattered when you had lost the respect of the one person who had ever truly loved you. The months that followed the wedding were a blur of change for both Maya and Aaron. While Aaron found himself lost in the aftermath of his own mistakes, Maya was finding new strength and purpose. The foundation had gained considerable traction, and Maya had begun to focus on expanding its reach. She was no longer just a survivor. She was now a leader, a force of nature determined to help other women walk the path she had walked. One morning, Maya sat at her desk, a pile of letters in front of her. These weren't just any letters, they were messages from women who had reached out for help, sharing their own stories of abuse, betrayal, and survival. Maya's heart ached with each word, each tear-streaked story that came across her desk. But there was something powerful about reading these letters. Every message, every woman who shared her experience, reminded Maya of the strength within herself. It was the same strength that had gotten her through the darkest moments of her life. As she read through the letters, Maya smiled to herself. This was her purpose now, not to be defined by the man who had humiliated her, but to help others who were facing similar struggles. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Elijah. Meeting today at 2. The foundation's board wants to discuss the expansion plans. You've come a long way, Maya. She smiled at the message, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Elijah had been her anchor throughout this journey. His belief in her had never wavered, and now, together, they were building something that would outlast the past. Meanwhile, Aaron had begun to withdraw from the public eye. His attempts to reclaim his career had failed miserably. His company had parted ways with him, citing a loss of trust, and all his efforts to make amends had fallen flat. The social media frenzy had died down, but it had left a permanent scar on his reputation. He spent his days in isolation, unable to face the world outside. The once bustling life he had led, filled with meetings, events, and high-profile dinners, now seemed like a distant memory. His phone lay unused on his desk, no messages, no calls. No one wanted to associate with the man who had ruined a wedding, humiliated his bride, and become a symbol of cruelty. One evening, Aaron sat alone in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but none of it seemed to matter. His world had become a quiet, desolate place, and no amount of wealth or success could fill the emptiness he felt inside. He had lost Maya. He had lost the woman who had once seen something in him. And in the process, he had lost himself. The arrogance, the ego, all of it had led him to this moment of reckoning. Aaron's phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. He picked it up, but there was no message. Instead, it was a notification from a news outlet. His eyes widened as he read the headline: Aaron Whitmore's fall from grace. How one groom's mistake shattered his life. The article detailed his humiliating actions at the wedding, the fallout from his behavior, and the damage to his business and personal relationships. Aaron tossed the phone aside, rubbing his face in frustration. There was no escape from the truth. No matter how much he tried to fix things, the damage was done. The world had moved on, and he was left to pick up the pieces of his own shattered pride. Maya's journey was one of empowerment, and it wasn't long before her work with the unveiled foundation caught the attention of the media. A few months after the disastrous wedding, she was invited to speak at a national conference on women's empowerment. It was a full-circle moment for Maya, standing before an audience of thousands, talking about the very thing that had once broken her, finding the strength to walk away and rebuild. Elijah was by her side, of course, his presence still a quiet but powerful support in her life. He had stood by her through every trial, every moment of doubt, and now, she was living her truth in the most public of ways. Maya stood at the podium, her hands steady, her voice confident as she spoke to the crowd. "When I walked away, I thought I was losing everything," she said, her words resonating with the women in the audience. "But what I didn't know was that I was walking into the life I was meant to lead, a life of purpose, a life where I could help others find their own strength." The room erupted in applause, and Maya's heart swelled with pride. She had walked through the fire, and now she was lighting the way for others. After the speech, a reporter approached her, microphone in hand. "Maya, your story has inspired so many. What's next for you?" the reporter asked. Maya smiled, her gaze steady and determined. "The foundation is growing. There's still so much work to be done. I want to help every woman who's ever felt like they didn't matter, every woman who's been made to feel small. We are not defined by our pasts. We are defined by what we do next." And with those words, Maya knew she was on the right path. Her future was hers to shape, and she was no longer bound by the mistakes of the past. Months had passed since the wedding debacle, and Maya's life was no longer defined by what had happened in that hall. It was defined by what she had built in its wake. The unveiled foundation had become a beacon of hope for thousands of women, and Maya was now traveling across the country, speaking at events, advocating for women's rights, and working tirelessly to expand her foundation's reach. The pain of the past had transformed into something powerful, something she could give to the world. As she stood in front of a crowded room at one of her foundation's new shelters, Maya took a moment to reflect. The women who sat in front of her were listening intently to her story, some with tears in their eyes, others nodding in understanding. Maya had found her purpose in helping them, and they had found their strength in her. "I never thought I could stand here, sharing my story with you," she said, her voice steady and strong. "But here I am, and if I can get through what I did, so can you. We are not defined by the men who tried to break us, or the people who doubted us. We are defined by the courage to move forward." The room erupted in applause. Maya's heart swelled with pride, not because of the applause, but because she knew that her story had given these women the courage to fight their own battles, to reclaim their lives, and to stand tall once again. Maya turned to look at the photograph on the wall behind her. A photo of her mother, smiling proudly at her wedding, the same wedding that should have been her happiest day. But today, as she stood here, leading this foundation, Maya felt her mother's presence more than ever. She felt her mother's love, her support, and the hope that she would one day make a difference in the world. Maya had done it. She had lived up to the woman her mother always believed she could be. As for Aaron, his life had become a series of quiet apologies, failed attempts at redemption, and constant reminders of his failure. His company had moved on, his business partners had distanced themselves, and the public had forgotten his name. Maya had done the impossible. She had moved on, built something incredible, and left him in the dust. He hadn't heard from her since the wedding day, and that was exactly how it was meant to be. Aaron understood now. He had no right to ask for her forgiveness, no right to expect anything from her. She had found her strength, and he had lost his. Late one evening, Aaron found himself standing in front of a mirror, staring at the man who had once been so full of pride. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by something he couldn't quite identify. Regret? Sorrow? Guilt? Maybe all three. The life he had once envisioned, filled with power, wealth, and control, seemed meaningless now. What was success when it came at the expense of everything that mattered? Maya had taught him that. She had shown him that true power lay not in what you could control, but in what you could give. He picked up the phone, his finger hovering over her number for a moment. He thought about sending a message, a simple apology, maybe a note of respect. But when he opened his contacts, he saw the number wasn't even saved anymore. Maya had erased him from her life, and rightfully so. He closed the phone, placing it down with a sense of finality. There would be no redemption for him, no second chance, and deep down, Aaron knew that it was what he deserved. Maya stood at the window of her office, looking out at the city skyline as the sun began to set. She had come a long way from that dark day at the altar. The road had been difficult, but it had led her to this moment, to the life she had always dreamed of, only stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever. Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Elijah. "It's all worth it, Maya. You've built something that will outlast all of us. Your mother would be proud." Maya smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. She knew Elijah was right. She had done more than just survive. She had thrived. She had created a legacy of hope, strength, and empowerment for every woman who needed it. With a deep breath, Maya stood tall, knowing that her journey was far from over. She had no idea where the future would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She would face it head-on, with grace, courage, and an unshakable belief in herself. And with that, Maya's story came full circle. What had begun as a moment of deep pain and betrayal had evolved into something far greater, a story of redemption, strength, and the power of resilience. She had walked away from a life of humiliation, and in doing so, had paved the way for others to do the same. The past no longer defined her. Her future was hers to shape. And as for Aaron, his story was over. Maya had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her future. The man who had once tried to break her would fade into obscurity, while she rose, a beacon of hope for all those who needed it.